Hello, welcome to week 4 of our course. During this week, we will be exploring the Second World War and the Cold War. Specifically, we are going to examine how these conflicts impacted American culture, society, and American citizens. The Second World War took place from 1939 to 1945. The United States was directly involved in the war from December of 1941 through August of 1945. 12 million American soldiers would serve in the war. 12 million men would be drafted or volunteer to serve in the conflict. And the war would have a profound impact on American society. You're looking at a few resources related to the war, readings in Boundless, as well as links that are provided in Canvas. You're asked for the discussion board to select one group of Americans who is impacted by the war and to discuss the impact that the war had upon them. Some ideas for groups that you could select. You could discuss the impact that the war had upon American women. You could discuss the impact that the war had upon African Americans. You could discuss the impact of the war on Japanese Americans. These are just a few examples of many groups within American society that you could discuss. The war was a total war, involved the complete mobilization of American society for the conflict. It had a number of impacts. First, unemployment was all but eliminated. Unemployment rates reached essentially zero. Anyone looking for a job during World War II could find a job. This had an impact on many groups who had previously been marginalized in the workforce. With so many American men being sent overseas to fight in the war, this opened up employment opportunities for American women. American women had certainly been deeply involved in the workforce and the labor force prior to the war. However, the war did open up new opportunities. Women had largely been excluded from well-paying jobs in heavy industry prior to World War II. Jobs working on assembly lines and the building of automobiles or other durable goods. During World War II, this radically changed. With the relative shortage of labor, there is tremendous demand for women to enter the workforce, and huge numbers of women did get jobs, often relatively well-paying jobs, in factories building the materials for the war effort, in aircraft manufacturing factories, tank manufacturing factories, etc., jobs that previously would not have been available to them. Many women who had never before been in the workforce entered the paid labor force for the first time as well. Another aspect of the war was that it drew individuals from the rural South into the Midwest and Northeast. There was a mass movement of people from the rural agrarian South into the cities of the Midwest, Northeast, and even to some extent the West Coast. Many of the individuals moving were African Americans who had worked in agriculture in the South. Now, many African Americans moved to cities like Chicago and Detroit. They also had new opportunities to enter the paid labor force. Factories that previously would not have hired African Americans now did hire African Americans. Franklin Roosevelt actually implemented legislation under pressure to grant equal employment opportunities to African Americans in any factory that received funding from the federal government. Almost all factories during World War II received funding from the federal government because they were producing material for the war. So there was a large movement of African American citizens to the North as well during this period and into industrial employment. Japanese Americans were likely the group most negatively impacted by the war. Um, Japanese Americans included both um, citizens and non-citizens, and tragically, Franklin Roosevelt ordered that Japanese Americans living on the West Coast be relocated to internment camps. The rationale for this was rooted in national security. Roosevelt asserted that Japanese Americans posed a security risk during the war. There was fear that Japanese Americans could launch sabotage attacks um, on American ports or factories to try to assist Japan in the war effort. This was an incredibly dubious and unwarranted claim. There's no evidence that Japanese Americans were committing acts of sabotage to support the Japanese government during the war. Many of these individuals were American citizens. Um, there was really no basis to believe that they were a security threat. This, most scholars today would certainly agree, was rooted in racism. Um, Japanese Americans were forced in a relatively short time to sell their homes and all of their possessions and to relocate to what amounted to prison camps in the interior of the country. This caused great, certainly economic harm, psychological harm to the individuals. Um, it included, you know, men, women, children, and was, is certainly one of the more negative aspects of American history during the war in general. Um, in the 1980s, the United States government did finally apologize for the internment program and provided a small measure of compensation to the survivors. Um, but certainly this remains a very tragic aspect of American history. You're also going to be examining the Cold War during this unit. The Cold War emerged shortly after the end of World War II. It was a period of incredible hostility and tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, between capitalism and communism, democracy and authoritarianism. This Cold War lasted from approximately 1947 up until the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s. This was a very long period of tension and conflict. One interesting development during the early phases of the Cold War was the emergence of the baby boom population. There was a baby boom in the United States that began just at the end of World War II and continued through the 1950s. This is the largest generation in American history, and the baby boom generation has had a profound impact on American history. There's much discussion and debate about why a baby boom occurred. What brought this about, essentially, in terms of cultural and social forces. In your writing assignment for this week, you're asked to comment upon the sources or origins of the baby boom population. Some argue that the end of the war brought about very much improved economic conditions, and after more than a decade of depression and war, individuals were ready to start families. That essentially people had put off marriage and having children during the Great Depression and World War II, and that now that the war was over and the economy was strong, that individuals began to marry and start families in large numbers. A second argument is that the Cold War created a tremendous sense of fear and insecurity. Everyone lived with the knowledge that the world could be destroyed at any moment with nuclear weapons, and that establishing families was a way of creating a sort of safe space or environment, a sense of security for individuals in the 1940s and 1950s. Creating the sort of idyllic home in suburbia became a sort of ideal of peace and tranquility. I hope that you'll find this unit to be interesting. I look forward to working with you during the unit. Thank you for your time.